Look around any parking lot in America right now. What you will see is a sea of enormous pickup trucks, most of which have never hauled anything heavier than a gym bag and a paper bag of groceries. The truck bed is spotless. The tow hitch has never been used. The payload capacity is listed at 2,000 pounds, and the heaviest thing it has ever carried is a case of water and a bag of mulch that one time. And yet, the truck costs $60,000, $70,000, sometimes $80,000. And there are more of them on the road every single year. This is not a story about trucks. It is a story about identity, aspiration, fear, and one of the most sophisticated marketing transformations in the history of the automobile industry. The pickup truck went from being a working vehicle to being the best-selling vehicle in America for over 40 consecutive years, without most people asking a very obvious question. Why? Let us start with what actually happened to trucks. In the 1970s and 1980s, the pickup truck was a tool. It was bought by farmers, construction workers, tradespeople, and ranchers who needed it to do a specific job. The bed was functional. The cab was Spartan. The marketing was practical. Ford advertised the F-Series as built tough. And it was. The people buying it needed it to be. Then something shifted. In the 1980s and 1990s, automotive manufacturers noticed something in their data. Trucks were being bought by people who did not need them for work. Suburbanites, professionals, people who lived in cities and drove 45 minutes to an office job. And those people were not buying trucks for the payload. They were buying them for something else entirely. Something the manufacturers could not quite name yet, but could absolutely exploit. That something was identity. Psychologist Naomi Ellemers at Utrecht University has spent decades studying the relationship between the objects people own and the identities they project. Her research shows that consumer goods are not just purchased for their utility. They are purchased as identity signals. A signal to others, and more importantly, a signal to yourself about who you are, what you value, and what kind of person you aspire to be. The pickup truck, in the American cultural imagination, carries a very specific identity signal: capable, independent, self-reliant, tough, hardworking, connected to the land. These are not values that most suburban office workers embody in their daily lives, but they are values that many of them aspire to or wish to be perceived as embodying. And a $60,000 truck parked in a suburban driveway is a very loud way of making that claim without having to do any of the actual work. Marketing strategist Douglas Holt, in his research on iconic brands, calls this aspirational identity consumption. You do not buy the product for what it does, you buy it for who it says you are. The truck does not need to haul anything. It just needs to signal that you could haul anything if you wanted to. The capability is the point, not the use of it. And the truck manufacturers understood this with extraordinary precision. In the 1990s and 2000s, Ford, Chevrolet, and Ram systematically transformed their marketing away from utility and toward identity. Trucks stopped being advertised with specifications and started being advertised with landscapes, rocky mountains, dusty trails, wide open skies. A lone truck navigating terrain that the actual buyer would never encounter. The truck became a symbol of freedom, of escape from the constraints of modern life, of the rugged individualism that Americans have always romanticized, even when living in dense suburbs with homeowner associations and scheduled lawn maintenance. And then the manufacturers did something even smarter. They made the trucks bigger. Not because buyers needed more capacity, but because behavioral economists have documented a well-established phenomenon called the size-quality heuristic. Research by consumer psychologists has consistently found that people associate larger physical size with higher quality, greater capability, and higher status. Bigger feels better, more substantial, more serious. A truck that takes up 2 parking spaces must be more capable than one that fits in one. The size itself became a feature. And once size became a feature, the arms race began. The Ford F-150 of 2024 is approximately 10 inches longer and 6 inches wider than the F-150 of 1990. It is also significantly heavier, which means it uses more fuel, which means it costs more to run, which means the buyer is paying a premium in operating costs for a vehicle they made larger primarily so it would look more impressive in the driveway. But here is where behavioral economics really enters the picture. In 2009, economist Thorstein Veblen's century-old concept of conspicuous consumption was updated by modern researchers studying the post-recession luxury market. What they found was something they called defensive consumption. After periods of economic uncertainty, consumers paradoxically increase spending on visible, high-status items. Not because they can afford to, but because displaying prosperity signals to others and to themselves that they are financially secure even when they are not. The truck is not just an identity signal, it is an anxiety response. When your neighbors are upgrading to a larger truck, not buying one can feel like falling behind. This is the classic keeping up with the Joneses dynamic, but amplified by social media, where people curate highly visible images of their vehicles, and by the design of modern suburban spaces, where your driveway is the most visible piece of real estate you own. And then there is the financing structure that made all of this possible at scale. In the early 2000s, automotive financing shifted dramatically toward longer loan terms. Where a 5-year car loan was once standard, 7- and 8-year loans became common. And with longer loans came lower monthly payments on more expensive vehicles. A $70,000 truck on an 8-year loan at a reasonable interest rate costs approximately $900 a month, which sounds like a lot. But broken down, that is $30 a day, which is less than many people spend on coffee and lunch. And the human brain, as behavioral economist Richard Thaler showed in his research on mental accounting, does not naturally track costs that are spread out over time the way it tracks lump sum purchases. $30 a day feels manageable. $70,000 feels enormous. But they are the same thing. The monthly payment framing did not just make expensive trucks affordable in the psychological sense. It made them feel like a reasonable daily expenditure rather than a major financial commitment. Which is why someone who would never write a check for $70,000 will sign a monthly payment agreement for $900 without hesitation. But what about the people who genuinely believe they need the truck? Research by transportation analysts has found that the vast majority of full-size pickup truck owners use their truck bed fewer than 5 times per year for actual hauling. Fewer than 5 times. For a vehicle that costs, at minimum, $50,000 and whose entire physical architecture is organized around the capability to haul things. Most of the time, the truck is just driving to work, driving to the grocery store, and sitting in a parking lot looking capable. This does not mean the truck owners are irrational. They are responding perfectly rationally to a set of incentives and psychological mechanisms that have been deliberately designed and refined over decades. The identity signal is real. The aspiration is real. The anxiety about status is real. The financing structure that makes the number feel manageable is real. These are not accidents. They are the product of billions of dollars of marketing research, psychological profiling, and product design. So what does any of this tell us about how to make better decisions? The research on aspirational identity consumption suggests one genuinely useful question to ask before any large purchase. Am I buying this for what it does or for who it says I am? And if the answer is the latter, the follow-up question is there a less expensive way to make that statement? The truck is the most visible example of this dynamic, but it is not the only one. The same psychology drives the purchase of designer handbags, luxury watches, kitchen appliances for people who do not cook, gym equipment for people who do not exercise at home, and cameras for people who take photos on their phones. The object is not the point. The identity it projects is the point. And the most honest thing behavioral economics can offer is this: knowing the mechanism does not make you immune to it. The identity signal is still real. The desire to project capability, success, independence, and aspiration does not disappear because you understand where it comes from. But it can be interrogated, and interrogating it, even briefly, is the difference between a decision and a purchase that was made for you by a very well-funded marketing department. The truck in the parking lot, immaculate bed, never hauled anything, will be replaced in 3 years by a slightly larger, slightly more expensive truck. And the one after that will be larger still, because the signal has to keep escalating to keep working. That is not a feature of trucks. That is a feature of aspirational consumption itself, and it has no natural ceiling except the one you decide to build.